Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time, this time to build, this time to build, this time to build, this time. Power, power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I am your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 10 of the Power Company Climbing Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. We in double digits, y'all. This is episode 10. I'm going to go ahead and say that I don't even have to tell you it's official anymore. And you know what? I've got about a dozen or so podversations in the can with people that I admire and respect and trust their opinions that I've recorded over about the last month. So we're going to start putting these things out maybe a little bit more frequently, maybe every 3 weeks instead of every 4, maybe every 2 if I'm feeling like podcasting a lot. So we'll see. Anyway, I just want to let you know where we're at. Nate and I are at the last stop of our Boulder Better workshop tour, and we're in Cincinnati right now. It's been really amazing. People have really come out. People have really responded, and all the feedback is great. All the reviews seem to be good. So we're really excited for that. And big thanks to everybody who's housed us along the way. My good friends Leif and Lindsay Gash, my friend Brendan Leonard, Ranvai Umot, one of my favorite people, Sophie Binder, and Katie Schultz and Peter Bonamici. Thank you guys for having us in your homes and putting up with us, and we really, really appreciate that. And we'll see all you guys again for sure. And thanks to everybody at all those gyms who came out. Okay, let's get on with this thing. Today I've got a really, really great conversation with probably the first name in training in America, Eric Hörst. If you've ever tried to figure out your own training, you've definitely read Eric Hörst books. There's no question. So Eric and I sat down in Lander and talked about energy systems training for climbing, because that's a new chapter in the 3rd edition of his Training for Climbing book, which was just released, and you can find on Amazon. And it's a really great update to an already great series of books. And if you have the 2nd edition, you should definitely go get the 3rd. There's quite a bit added. It's been reworked. I think it's the best book he's ever put out. So, all right, let's talk with Eric.
Maybe don't know.
So then that's where climbing wisdom comes in. And so to train smarter means to not necessarily train harder.
Power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build.
We're actually recording this time.
Take two.
Yeah, take 2. First off, congrats on the book. Looks amazing, full color, it's beautiful, and I think it really steps up the bar for not just climbing books, not just training books, but training books in general. For me, a lot of training books are tough to pick up and read and get through, and they don't look amazing. And this one looks great.
Yeah.
So congrats on getting this out there.
3rd time around, we got it right.
That's a huge accomplishment. Yeah. I mean, writing one book is insane, and you've got how many before the 1st edition of Training for Climbing?
Yeah, there's been several books, that's for sure.
And you're 3 editions deep.
Yeah, it's been a passion of mine, and I've been climbing for 40 years and training for 40 years and writing about training for 30 years and coaching climbers off and on for 30 years. So I've been at this a long time. Call me a veteran, I guess, being in my 50s. But this book, the 3rd edition, is 16 years after the 1st edition that came out in 2000, 2nd edition in 2008, and those books have circulated internationally. I think I've tracked books to like 50 different countries. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
you
that's
don't
really
get
cool.
rich writing climbing books, but
Sure.
it is gratifying to know you're helping climbers around the world improve their game, enjoy climbing more, enjoy the experience more. That's what it's all about for me.
And it's obvious. I mean, it's obviously a passion of yours. You've been doing it forever, and even though I'm sure the money's growing more than it was, back in '95 or whenever you published your first book, it's still never going to make you rich. So
no, I mean, that's just the nature of climbing. It's still, even though the sport's growing, it's still kind of a niche sport. And, most of the growth is in indoor climbing. I think they say like 5 million people tried climbing last year, but 80% of them didn't venture outside, which is maybe a good thing in terms of impacts. But, so the people that just climb indoors for fun, I probably don't, get that serious into the training and buying books and stuff. But, certainly to the people that take their climbing outdoors and want to, take their climbing to the next level, you need information. And, we've talked before, there's a lot of great information out there. I'm someone that when I speak to climbers, whether it's at the crag or whether it's at a clinic or a talk, I say, buy everything. No climbing trainer or author has a monopoly on the truth. We're still pursuing the truth. We're still finding out what works. And even though 10 years ago, I might have thought, if you asked me that I had it 90% figured out, I don't think that's the case. I think we're at the tip of the iceberg, and the new research that's being done, I'm engaging the guys in the lab coats doing that research, and it's exciting. And, so this book provides a fresh look. It's massively overhauled. If a listener has a previous edition, this book is significantly different and expanded in a number of areas. And one of them is trying to build in the latest research. And
I think you do a great job of that, that you dig in deep to that research that is so hard for the rest of us to read. And you do a great job of kind of bridging that gap between that technical scientific writing and putting it into something comprehensible for the average person.
Yeah,
So,
well, I appreciate that. I mean, there's other climbing coaches that read the research or at least the abstracts and try to, keep up to snuff, but a lot don't, and that's not a slight to them. I mean, if you're in the gym and you're coaching every day, it's tough to then, go
sure.
home and, read a technical paper, which can be overwhelming.
And that's why I appreciate you putting these books out, because now my business is coaching. I spend a lot of time coaching and writing training plans for people, and I want to know what the latest research is, and I'm interested to hear it, but I don't necessarily have the time to decipher a scientific paper.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's right. And I think, there's a couple of things that make a good climbing coach or trainer like yourself. One, you need the real life experience. You need to have been immersed and have a significant journey that you can tap on your experience. And yours is certainly very unique and rich. You also need to have experience working with clients. Every time I coach a new client, you learn from them, and you get that feedback. Everybody has different genetics and responds a little differently to programs. So each person that you coach offers you an opportunity for learning if you're, self-aware and, following things closely. And then the third thing is the research is not being closed-minded and, kind of thinking, hey, I know it all, I have it all figured out. There might be days that I feel that way, or maybe a coach feels that way, but really they should step back and take the blinders off and realize, this is a young sport when it comes to the research. And especially in the last decade, the amount of research has been expanding exponentially. And I've, in recent years, actually gotten to engage these researchers personally. Next month I'm speaking to the International Rock Climbers Researchers Association. Their summit in Telluride. The best researchers from around the world will be there presenting their papers, and I'm giving a keynote talk on the application of their research and kind of also presenting some questions. I've started to do some research on my own, and
I think that's important because you're in the field doing it.
Yeah, and so I hope to kind of maybe exchange with them. Obviously, I want to learn from them what they're doing, but also as someone kind of on the application side of things, show them what I'm thinking about and what questions I'd like to have answered in a lab setting, and hopefully collaborate with a couple of these guys that have similar interests to me. And so it's an exciting time. And although it maybe won't benefit me because I'm in my 50s and I'm just fighting to hold where I'm at, against
you're getting stronger though. I keep seeing bigger and newer sins. So
having
that's
teenage
exciting.
Kids helps push me a little bit.
And you know what? I'm just gonna have to make an aside here, but climbing with you guys out at the crag today, Cam's a man. Like he's
full grown now.
He's grown up.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And John's not too far behind him. He's already well on his way to a stand-up comedy career.
Yeah.
Which I find
they're
amazing.
They're very unique individual. That's for sure. And I always like to point out to people that they read about maybe my family but don't know us, is that my kids do more than just climb. Just to clarify that. I'm not an overbearing climbing parent that is just pushing my kids to follow in my footsteps. My kids came into climbing just naturally, and they play tackle football. In fact, we get home in August.
We talked as much about football today as we did climbing.
They start their tackle football season, and a young growing body needs to do many different movement patterns. You know that from being an athlete as a teenager in the school years. If you're doing one movement pattern all the time, you're setting yourself up for trouble, in terms of injury and just burnout. If you do one thing all year round, even adults burn out, but certainly kids can too. And what have I done for my kids if they would hate climbing by age 20 because they did it so much? And
they're just going to be better athletes by experimenting in other sports. And
so I think all climbers, and not just my kids, but I impress upon all people that I work with, because climbing is such a complex activity. You get good fast. Those first few years, the learning curve is steep, and you can get strong fast if you're training right. But it's a sport where, mastery and pursuing your genetic potential, you have to have a long-term perspective. And there's Chris Sharma, the best climber ever, in my opinion. Although I guess Adam's up there, and Alex certainly is as well. But Sharma's in his mid-30s, and he's still pushing the limits. He's talking about 15D maybe being in his future.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's training.
He's being inspired by those young guys. So
he is, And then
Chris's resume is still growing. You can't count him out.
And then you have someone like Alex Megus, who you look at him now at 22, and you say, how much harder can the guy climb? And then you think, well, he's got another 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
If he stays healthy and stays motivated and doesn't burn out, watch out.
Who knows
might be 16A in the future. So, long-term perspective. That's what I tell my kids. It's great to climb hard when you're young, but it's even better just to climb for life. And I think that's the best gift I can give my kids, is if they're a climber for life. So, but enough with that tangent.
Let's dig into kind of some of the new things that are in the book. I definitely think that even if you own, the first edition or the second edition of Training for Climbing, you're going to want to pick up this one. In my opinion, this is the best edition yet. So I think it's just improving. And there are some new things in here that I think are pretty interesting. I'll touch on a few of them, and I want to kind of dig into one of them in particular. First off, you've included mobility and stability training, which I think is a huge thing. And coming off of my shoulder injury last year and going through rehab for as long as I did, it really highlighted to me this idea that we've, like you were just saying, by focusing on only climbing for so long and doing repetitive movements over and over, we're really just destroying our body's potential to get better at climbing. Yeah,
and if I could share one thing, I'm glad you like that, because it's really maybe not the most sexy addition to the book, but maybe the most important for a climber who wants to have a long career. Is injury will sideline you. Injury will, if it's bad enough, if you have chronic elbow tendonitis, or if you have a shoulder that has multiple injuries or repairs, it might be eventually the end of your climbing career. But I present this idea of developing stability before strength and strength before power. So I present it in the book as a pyramid, with stability at the base of the pyramid, strength being the middle layer, and then the power being the top of the pyramid. So it's tempting as a climber, you join a climbing gym.
Right to strength and power.
Exactly. You join a climbing gym, or you build a home wall, and then you build that campus wall, and then hey, it's there, and it is exciting, and it is fun, to campus. But if you haven't developed, your scapular stabilizers, or even if they are developed, if you're overtraining, you're going to end up with problems. And just developing good campusing technique. Last summer we spent some time in Germany, and we climbed with Alex Megos, who's a friend of ours, and we went to the gym with him. And I watched him campus a little bit, and I'm like, wow, I've never seen an American climber campus the way Alex campused in terms of his form, chest out, arms bent. And
interesting.
If you go to Instagram every day, there's somebody doing their campus video, showing their 158 or whatever, and that's cool. It's exciting, but you see fully extended arms, you see shrugged shoulders, and those are all the things that lead to impingement. And so climbers rush into this, and they're not strong enough to train on a campus board extensively and not get injured. And now I'm just not strong enough to train on a campus board, period. So I don't have to worry about it.
I tried to campus the other day, just a few moves here and there in between deadlifting, and it was the first time I'd tried any campus moves since my shoulder injury. And it highlighted to me a weakness that I wasn't aware was there. And so I'm not going to go back in campus, but now I'm going to work on stabilizing those things. Yeah.
But it's tough because you're young and you're enthusiastic, and I was there, and if you survive that young enthusiastic period, good for you. But a lot of people don't, because they jump straight to the campus board, or they jump straight to some crazy form of training. And if you can be a little, again, that long-term perspective and saying, okay, you know what? Yeah, I have access to this campus board, but before I do that, I'm going to do a 6-month period of stabilizer training. So my rotator cuff and my scapular stabilizers can actually control the joint and put it in the proper position so that I can then campus with that good technical form. I actually have a little video I shot of Alex that I'm going to post sometime, just so people can see,
I'd love to see that.
How controlled it was. It's from that step. His coaches are great, Patrick and Dickie, and they took him in training him for a decade through that step-by-step process, and don't put the cart before the horse. And
we don't see that.
It was a very mature approach, very mature coaching, and
we see the end result, him crushing everything he touches, but we don't see the stabilization exercises that he was doing with his coaches for years.
That's right. And so it's all these videos out there on the internet, on Instagram and Facebook and stuff, of people doing this crazy stuff. And a young climber wants to try it, and that's cool. I never like to tamp down that passion, but yet I try to educate at least the people I have access to into, hey, one step at a time. You'll get there, but don't rush it.
For sure.
And that's all. There's a whole chapter in the book that focuses on that and presents some exercises, some known, some maybe not so well known, that if you do them for several months, I actually, a couple of years ago when I started doing these myself, I could get on the rock and actually feel like, oh my gosh, I'm actually pulling my scapula into proper position.
Right. When you start paying attention to it, it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and it's a sensation I never knew before. I didn't have the kinesthetic awareness or the control. The scapula was just going where it wanted to go.
Right.
And now that I can feel that, and that's when you can get to that level.
Yeah, that's the whole point of doing these exercises.
Exactly. And that's what a good coach is able to communicate. But for them to communicate it, they first have to be aware of it and understand it. And so, hopefully those coaches will read the book. Not that this is the final word; it's not, but it's another step, up in the data out there. And
I'm glad you put it in there.
Yeah,
I think it's important, and I think it's gaining some popularity. I'm glad it's in there.
And there's a lot of stuff in the book. It's 360 pages, so it's tough to, in a couple of minutes, for us to go cover all the new territory. But that's one of the, I think, important areas. Maybe not the most exciting, but one of the most important.
Yep. And just a quick one of the new things that you've got in there. It's a little short section, and it's actually something I've been using. I didn't have a name for it necessarily, but the daily undulating periodization.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of clients who want to perform while they're training.
Yep.
And for me, being a Red River climber, I come from, you've got a very specific season for training and a very specific season for performing. And, the guys out here don't necessarily have that because they can climb year round in good conditions. So So I've been using a system very similar to your daily undulating periodization.
Sure.
If you want to just describe what that is kind of briefly.
Well, we're all familiar with, a more standard periodization or periodized program where you do like a block of aerobic endurance, then a block of strength, and then a block of power endurance, something like that. And there's many different protocols out there. Some might be 20 weeks long. I have a 10-week plan that I've used in my books for years that I really like. And those work great when you have off seasons, let's say, or at least if you're an East Coast climber, you can't really climb hard for performance in July and August because of the conditions. So, that's a training period for your fall season. So you can do those blocks of, more, multi-week or month periodized program. But what do you do during your on season? Or if you live in a location you can climb year round and you can't dedicate 10 or 20 weeks to a periodized program, what do you do? Well, obviously the first thing you want to do is train for whatever your current project is. That's obviously a plan that we all are familiar with. But if there is no specific project or no really clear weakness that you need to spin up, well, then you need to actually try to train everything. And when I say everything, I'm talking about all three energy systems, but you can't do them all in the same workout. So, and if you are doing them in the same workout, you're not training effectively. That this daily undulating program, basically you're trying to hit each energy system at least once during the week. So if your weekend is spent sport climbing, which is very most places, one pitch routes that are very pumpy, that really hammers your anaerobic lactic energy system where you get that real acidity burning in your muscles. So then during the week, you would actually want to do a strength power workout, like a bouldering workout or campusing if you're ready for it, or, hypergravity pull-ups, focus on strength and power for one session, and then focus on the aerobic energy system, which would be volume climbing, but at a much lower intensity for one workout. And so then when you look at the week as a whole, you had your two anaerobic lactic, those are the pumpy weekend sport climbing days. And then during the week, you had your strength day and your aerobic day. So you look at it, you've covered all three energy systems over the 4 workouts. Everybody's different, so if you're bouldering twice on the weekend, you'd actually want to do a power endurance session and an aerobic session during the week and let your nervous system recover. Because if you're bouldering at your limit 2 days in a row, your nervous system doesn't come back in a day or two. So really go easy on your nervous system during the week and train the other 2 energy systems. And that's where the book, not only that protocol, but actually the whole subject of energy system training
I really want to dig
presented.
into that because I think that's a really important way to train. And I had been training that way to a degree. I'm not, I wasn't super versed in what I was doing exactly. It just kind of came about naturally. Knowing that these are things I need to work on and this is how I need to train them. But I think it's really interesting. It's becoming a little more popular looking at it in terms of energy systems. And I think that's the biggest new part of the book that I think people are going to need to look at. So let's kind of dig into that. So.
Yeah, well, it's a new way to look at things. And if someone's been doing a periodized training program where they have a block of endurance and a block of strength and power and a block of power endurance, you're roughly, at least, you're trying to train the 3 energy systems and target them during those 3 different blocks. But what's not been intimated or presented very well is what defines an exercise as focusing or targeting a single energy system. What are the, what's the framework of a workout that's just targeting strength and power, which is anaerobic alactic. And so we I think smart climbers have had a fuzzy understanding of things and have tried to train in ways that they're training all 3 energy systems, but there's a lot of overlap. And when I see climbers in the gym, and even myself in the past, there are, when I'm at the end of a workout and I write everything down that I've done, it's like, shit, I actually just did stuff that trains all three energy systems, which,
Sure.
as I said a few minutes ago, means you're not training any of them effectively.
Yeah, it's really hard to focus in.
It's really hard to focus in. So in this book, every exercise presented, and there's 100 plus, is basically listed as, tells you what the protocol is and which energy system it targets. And then it allows you to then specifically have a workout that just focuses on exercising and climbing that targets that specific energy system. With, again, the goal of being very specific. So, we all, coaches, the number one rule in effective training is the rule of specificity, or the principle of specificity. You need to train in a very specific way if it is to be effective in, advancing you in your sport. And of course, specific for climbing means climbing a lot and doing exercises that mimic climbing and work the same movement patterns and the same muscles and the same angle of force application.
Right.
But the most specific you can get on a cellular level is the way the ATP is being produced. And there's 3 energy pathways that generate ATP for you to power your climbing. And so the most specific form of training is one that targets the individual energy system. So we're not talking about something that a beginner is going to apply. A beginner needs to learn to climb and, and develop all the skill and the mental skills and then develop the stability. But if you're pretty far on your journey and you're a more advanced climber, the more nuanced your program needs to be. Again, if you're training this year the way you were last year, you're not training effectively. The better you get, the longer you're in the sport, the more nuanced your training has to be to get you to the next level. And so this energy system training, this kind of paradigm that I'm presenting for training specifically is another level of nuance that climbers can leverage and utilize to make their workouts more effective.
Yeah, let's look at the 3 individually just a little bit. Maybe give a few examples of exercises that people can work on. So first, let's look at the anaerobic alactic system, which is basically, to put it in climber layman terms, bouldering. It's hard, short sequences.
Yeah, that's right. And so that anaerobic alactic energy system is what powers your peak movements. Your whether it's a maximal crimp on an edge or a pocket or a powerful lock-off or a one-arm pull or a lunge, that's being powered by that anaerobic alactic energy system. And the ATP and the creatine phosphate that is stored in your muscles is what powers that, and it runs out in 8 to 12 seconds. Yeah. So if you're doing pull-ups and you start on a pull-up bar and you start doing a set of 20 pull-ups, you're not training the anaerobic alactic energy system because 20 pull-ups, if you're using good form, probably takes you, 40 seconds to do 20 pull-ups. Well, you're deep into the next energy system, which is anaerobic lactate, which we'll get to in a moment. So to train the alactic pathway, brief maximal exercises. So campus training, of course. You get on a campus board.
And not campus training where you're going up and down and up and down and up and down, which is where I think a lot of people make the mistake.
That's right. If you're using big sloper rails and you're lapping up and down like on big full hand things, then you're
in
training
another energy system.
You're in the anaerobic lactic, because usually when people do that type of training, and that's a good form of power endurance training, if you're going up and down on a campus board for 45 seconds, that's power endurance. That's anaerobic lactic. You're training a totally different energy system. The alactic is the brief maximal power, 12 seconds or
big
less.
Big pulls,
so
the 159
exactly,
maximal ladders, like that.
Or double dynos, or if you're just breaking in, it might just be a few hand moves with your feet on. It's all, everything's got to be scaled. That's critical. Exactly. So a beginner, if you can only do 5 pull-ups, well then it's training the anaerobic alactic energy system. But if you can do 25 pull-ups, well then if you want to train that energy system with your pulling muscles, you got to add weight, so you can only do 5 reps.
Right.
So if you're doing weighted pull-ups, hypergravity pull-ups as I call it, like I do them with about 80 pounds added to my body and do 3 to 5 reps per set, because that's all I can do for the most part, maybe 6 or 7 at the most. that's your workout for the anaerobic alactic energy system.
Yeah.
Maximal fingerboard hangs. If you're doing a minimum edge protocol or a maximum weight protocol where you can only hang on the board for 5 or 10 seconds, again, that's training the alactic energy pathway. If you're going longer than that, then you're moving into the lactic. And here's the other way you can tell. If you're doing any exercise and getting pumped, then it's not alactic.
You're going too long.
You're going too long. If really, if you think about it, if you're doing maximal campusing, you don't get off the board and say you're pumped.
Yeah.
So that's what you're training. You're training maximum strength or power for very brief bursts, no pump. In fact, when you're doing that alactic workout, if you're doing a session that focuses on exercises and climbing protocols that target that anaerobic alactic energy system, most of the workout you're resting.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So
that's tough for climbers.
It's tough for climbers. That's right.
You want to try, and then you end up pumped 30 minutes into a bouldering session, and it's confusing for people. And
it is. And, so what I tell my kids, I train with my boys in the gym. When we're doing these max strength power workouts, I'm saying today is about resting.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's about super high quality efforts on whatever exercise we're doing, perfect technique, near maximal effort. It doesn't have to be to failure. In fact, most of the time you don't want to train to failure on these types of exercises. You want to stop one move short on the campus board, or maybe one rep short, or 2 or 3 seconds short of the limit on your max weight hangs. But they're near maximal efforts. They're brief. And if you have a 7-second effort, it's being followed by, 10 to 20 times that length of rest.
Yep.
So most of the workout is resting. And if you've done it right at the end of the workout, you don't even feel that wasted.
Right.
But if you know the science,
it's tough for people to connect with that sometimes, especially initially, because they want to feel worked
they
out.
And that's why they have to know a little bit about the science, which the book tries to lay out. So you're doing those sessions, and you should know that you're not going to feel wasted at the end of them. And if you do something at the end of your session to try to waste you, it very well may be counterproductive if you're trying to target the anaerobic alactic energy system. Some elite climbers will do a split workout where they'll do a morning workout that targets one energy system, and then an afternoon workout with about a 6-hour break in between that targets a separate energy system. That can be a very effective way for an advanced climber to go about things.
Right.
So if they,
you need a lot of
time, and you need to be ready for that. You can't. If you're only you're on your 3rd year of climbing and you're just starting to break into the higher grades, you can't train like Adam Ondra.
Right.
And you read those crazy workouts that those guys do. You can't do that. You're going to hurt yourself.
Yep.
And so one step at a time. And again, that's what the book tries to present: is the science, the protocols, and a really as evidence-based as can be at this time mature approach to going about things. Now, if all you do is train anaerobic alactic, you're going to get really powerful for a couple of moves. You'll be good at doing 3-move boulder problems.
Yep.
But if you hit a 15-move boulder problem, or you want to get on a sport route, that's not enough. You need to train the other energy systems. So again, that's what the book tries to map out, is how you can go about that. So that's the first energy system.
There's one more thing I want to touch on in the anaerobic alactic system. And first, just a quick sidebar, something I do with my clients that I think works really well is I have some of them use a timer when they're resting in between problems. But if you're not going to carry a timer into the gym, or you don't take your phone into the gym with you or whatever, I try to suggest that my clients take their shoes off in between problems. Mm-hmm. It's really easy if you keep your shoes on to just jump back up and try it again.
Forces you to take that
break.
But
if you take your shoes off, you're going to sit there for a few more minutes.
Yeah.
So I think it's just a good habit to get into. If you try really hard on a boulder problem, take your shoes off, sit down, wait until you're ready to try again.
Right.
Okay.
And again, I think a climber, if they're going to try to use the energy system training methods, they have to recognize there is a difference between a vicious 5-move boulder problem, which takes 10 or 15 seconds, and a longer boulder problem where you're fighting and you're getting pumped and it takes you're on there for 30 or 45 seconds. they're not the same thing when it comes to energy system
Yeah,
training.
and it's easy to get trapped into wanting to send, so you end up doing the same 5 moves you can already do leading into the move where you keep falling.
Right.
And that move where you keep falling might not be maximal effort for you. It might just be that you're getting a little pumped when you get there. So
yeah, and that's the beauty of a campus sport or of a system wall is that, you're not locked into setting or sending a set problem.
Right.
You're using that system wall or campus board as a tool, and you know ahead of time, okay, I'm doing 5 moves. That's it. I do the 5 moves, I step off, and I rest.
Yep.
You get on a boulder problem, it's not always that way, Every boulder problem is different, and most are going to take you more than 10 or 15 seconds, and hence you start to go pretty deep into the anaerobic lactic energy system. That's the one that you're getting pumped. That's the signal that you're into that zone, and I guess we can talk about that next here if you want.
Yeah. So the anaerobic lactic system is longer boulders, short sport climbs. It very much gets targeted here at the Wild Iris, where we were climbing today. So yeah, let's dig into that one a bit. This is the pump area.
This is the pump area, and there's the science is still getting fleshed out. For the last 50 years we've heard about lactic acid.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
And it's a subtle the lactate molecules and the hydrogen ions dissociate in the body, and so lactic acid doesn't really exist. You create lactate and you create hydrogen ions, among other byproducts of anaerobic metabolism of glucose. So you're getting acidic when you get into that pumpy zone.
And we've always looked at that as a big negative thing, but lactate isn't necessarily just a negative.
That's right. Yeah, and again, it's a kind of a complex subject, but science has pretty much figured it out. The lactate is not a bad thing. The hydrogen ions are, because the hydrogen ions, that's what lowers the pH inside of the cell. And actually, if you are exercising maximally for 45 seconds, the pH drops markedly inside of the cell. And what that does is it affects the mitochondria, which are what aerobically generate ATP and drive recovery. If you climb to the point of getting very acidy chronically, many, many days in a row, mitochondria efficiency can actually be hammered back, and you can actually lose endurance. And so, and of course, the dropping pH is one of the things that most threatens homeostasis, and your body shuts down. Basically your brain, your central nervous system will shut you down. That's one of the reasons, as you start getting pumped and that muscle burn, your body the muscles start to shut down. Because they want to preserve homeostasis. And only by stopping anaerobic metabolism of glucose do you stop making those hydrogen ions, and then they can get out of the cell into the bloodstream and circulate and eventually be buffered by bicarbonate, and actually lactate is a buffering mechanism that it's kind of a first stop or first step in trying to buffer the ions is, basically at about 2 minutes, anaerobic metabolism of glucose virtually ceases. So when you're doing those real pumpy sections on a steep sport route or on a long boulder problem, that pump grows and grows and grows. And despite all the training in the world, you can't go much beyond about 2 minutes.
Right. Which makes it pretty important to climb fast. We watched BJ today climbing ridiculously fast, in my opinion, because I'm a slow, sloth-like climber, And I heard Cam actually comment on it that he climbs really fast. Look at Andra. Look at Megos.
Exactly. It's funny. The strong climbers you think don't need to climb fast, but they're smart enough to know they need to do it. And so really what I tell people, and actually one of the ways I've coached my sons in red pointing, is you got to get from one rest position to the next in under 2 minutes. The faster, the better.
Cameron, and do it efficiently. You can't just be sloppy and fly through.
Moving fast is of no benefit if your technique suffers, but as fast as you can move without a drop off in quality of movement is beneficial. If you watch Andra on his videos, these long sustained routes like at Flat Anger or even some of the stuff in Spain, he'll go from one rest to the next in under 2 minutes. And if he doesn't, he falls. And now what he can rest on
Right. It's
and
totally
what
different.
you and I can rest on is different. Why is that? Because he's stronger.
Right.
So that's something I also explain in the book is rule number 1 is get stronger. Because that is that's the ultimate defining measure on what you can rest on. And there's science behind that maybe we don't want to get into today. But the stronger you get, the smaller the hold you can rest on. So again, for me, I need a full hand jug if I'm at the Red River Gorge to shake out and get something back.
Right.
A 514 climber can probably shake out on a 2-pad hold, and maybe Andra on a 1-pad hold.
Which is why it's so hard for 514 climbers to grade 512s at the Red, because all the holds are rest holds, so it's nearly impossible for them to know what they're climbing on.
So what we're unraveling here is a pretty complex topic, tough to really fully describe to a listener in a podcast. My book tries to do it, tries to get you started on understanding this concept of energy system training and how they're all intertwined. And by the way, here an example of that is the lactate that is generated by the anaerobic metabolism of glucose. That rising lactate can be used to generate ATP aerobically.
Right.
So
it basically becomes a fuel.
It becomes a fuel. It's a bridge between the lactic system and the aerobic system. And this is interesting. There's research that shows that better aerobic trained climbers recover more quickly. And one of the reasons, there's several reasons, but one of the reasons is they can metabolize and utilize that lactate and help hasten the return of homeostasis because they have a better aerobic energy system. Mm-hmm. Not only a climbing specific aerobic energy system, like say in the forearms or arms, but a general aerobic system. Mm-hmm. And we could do a whole podcast on the pros and cons of running for climbers, but one of the pros of doing a moderate amount of running is you train your leg muscles to consume lactate. So think about this.
I'm going to have to put a bomb noise in here right now because everybody's like, wait, he's telling me to run.
Yeah. Well, there's pros and cons.
There's
pros and cons. And for everybody, you have to do that assessment and determine whether it will be beneficial to you or not.
Exactly. And I think the people who love to run and who already overdo it probably don't need to be doing it to the degree that they are.
Yeah.
And I think people, whenever they read any training book, kind of grab onto the things that they already do and they're already good at, and good, I'm going to do more of that. And I don't think that's what you're saying at all.
No, and you can't run yourself to being a better climber.
Right.
Just like you can't deadlift your way to being a better climber.
Sure.
But does that mean deadlifting is not useful for climbers? I would argue, as I do in the book, that a little bit of the right protocol might actually help you out. And same thing with running. A little bit of the right protocol, the right amount will help you in certain ways. Obviously, it'll help somebody if they have body composition issues. Dropping weight is the quickest way to improve your apparent strength if you're overweight. If you're not overweight, well, then running can still help you a little bit by
the cardiovascular
that general aerobic conditioning. Again, if you're running 70 miles a week, you're doing too much.
Right.
But a moderate amount of running, Alex Magos told me he runs 5 to 10 kilometers 3 or 4 days a week. That's what works for him. Everybody's got to find out what works for them.
Sure.
For some climbers, maybe it's zero running. Mm-hmm. But the research is pretty clear that aerobically trained climbers recover more quickly. Maybe not critical if you're just a boulder specialist, but if you're a rope climber, recovery is pretty important. How fast you recover at those rest positions or between red point burns, or even if you're a competition climber where you have a 5-minute rest until you get on your next boulder, that recovery is important. And by the way, final thing about how the energy systems dovetail, the aerobic energy system is what regenerates the anaerobic alactic energy system.
Right.
We talked about the creatine phosphate in your muscles that help power those brief, short movements, maximal movements. It gets created aerobically. All recovery is aerobic. So, that's why even a boulderer, you can make a case for doing some aerobic conditioning at least climbing specific aerobic conditioning, because if their mitochondria can regenerate that creatine phosphate more quickly, they will recover more quickly between boulders. They'll recover more quickly on micro rests, where you just get to flex your hand once or twice for 2 seconds, and you get enough to do one more move.
Right. Yep.
We've all experienced that. I did yesterday. I was on last man standing, and I made it through all the hard stuff, but my grip was giving out, and I got 1 or 2 quick flexes of my fingers, not even long enough to get into my chalk bag,
Right.
but it was enough to get a little oxygen moving, mitochondria crank out a few ATP, and boom, I was able to grab one more crimp and finish the route.
Awesome.
That micro recovery is trained by doing some targeted aerobic energy system training. So again, even if you think it's all about this maximum strength and power, you find out the energy systems dovetail. And to really, I think, climb your best, you need a nuanced program that addresses all 3 energy systems.
I'm glad you said that, because now I'm going to refer all my bouldering clients back to this podcast. So that,
Yeah.
Because when I give them, low intensity recovery days that are mostly just aerobic climbing, they're like, well, I'm just a boulderer. I don't need to do that. And
Right.
and I feel like they do.
Yeah,
So-
and there's a couple important distinctions, and maybe we can move into the aerobic energy system here, the third and final energy system.
Yep, let's go
A couple of the distinctions. We need to recognize the difference between a general aerobic training activity like running or any other, swimming, biking, you name it. I prefer running, but you could do a Concept 2 rower machine. That's a generalized aerobic training, works your whole body.
Right.
It doesn't target the climbing muscles. Then you have climbing specific aerobic training where you're targeting the forearms and the pulling muscles with a climbing activity or a training activity that is at the proper intensity to primarily work that aerobic energy system, not going too deep into the lactic energy system. One thing I present in the book that I think is unique, I haven't seen it presented for a climber yet, is the idea of a training intensity scale. It's a subjective perceived exertion scale, where based on the pump that you're feeling, the breathlessness that you acquire, and just your effort on a scale of 1 to 10, being able to roughly approximate what energy system you're targeting. And there's actually a graphic in the book that explains it a lot better than I can with words here in a podcast. But that very casual, low-intensity climbing, people call it arc training or recovery training,
Right.
where you're just kind of moving on the wall. There's very little sense of any pump. That's probably like at best an effort of 5 out of 10. That obviously targets the aerobic energy system. You're not getting pumped. You're not doing maximal moves. You can climb for 20 or 30 minutes traversing on easy terrain.
And you're not getting pumped. I think that's a really important part of that.
You're not getting pumped.
Yeah.
So that lower intensity training, recovery training, arc training, whatever you want to call it, your perceived exertion is at best a 5. As you get higher on that perceived exertion scale, usually it's around a 7 or 8 where the pump starts to develop.
Right.
You get, to a 9, it's a blistering pump. You're out of breath. You're deep into the lactic energy system, the anaerobic lactic energy system. You're no longer training just the aerobic energy system. And by the way, all 3 energy systems are all operating simultaneously at all times.
Yep.
It's just about which one's doing the most work, which one's being taxed the most or becomes the limiting constraint. So it's usually around a 7 or 8 on that perceived exertion scale where the pump starts to build and you kind of cross a threshold. And it's not a sharp crossing. It's a transition. And actually, the most effective training of the aerobic energy system isn't that arc training, that recovery training that's at a 5 out of 10, but it's right when you're in that threshold zone where the pump is starting to build. I talk, again, when I train at my house, I think about a moderate pump that is kept under control versus a pump that becomes blistering and you're breathless and you're out of control. You've gone really deep into the anaerobic lactic at that point. So the best for training mitochondria efficiency, and mitochondria are very plastic. The research shows that, a dedicated 4-week period of quality aerobic training can increase your mitochondria density and efficiency significantly so that you will perform better on those long routes like Red River Gorge climbing, we always think of. The longer you can energize your climbing aerobically, the longer you can go till you get pumped.
Right.
Which
you
is
you say in the book aerobic system is 2 minutes to 2 hours. If you're on the wall for in between that period of time, that's what system's going to have to take over.
That's right. But if you're on the wall a long time, if you're climbing at that low arc, intensity, that kind of recovery intensity where you can go for 20 or 30 minutes, that's actually not the most, in my opinion, and based on research, not the most effective way to bring about the adaptations of the aerobic energy system.
You're looking to get more pumped,
right.
more pumped.
You need to tax the aerobic system to get it to adapt. I mean, we're talking about angiogenesis, building of capillaries. We're talking about increasing oxidative enzymes. We're talking about, most importantly, mitochondria density and efficiency, among other adaptations that occur. And you'll get the best adaptations by taxing your aerobic energy system as maximally as you can without dipping too deep into the anaerobic lactic energy system. Because you dip too deep into that and get acidic, that actually has a negative effect on mitochondria. Right. So again, I call it threshold workouts, and that's not a name I invented. That's been used by runners for decades.
Yep. Where on your scale would you put that?
Right. So for every climber, it would be different, but that threshold level would be anywhere from a 7 to an 8.5, the way I present it on my scale. So again, you're starting to get pumped, but it's a controllable pump. It's not the blistering pump. You're not starting to suck for air. You're not like starting to thrash on your route or your climbing, whatever platform you're using. It's all about maintaining control. And if you find yourself losing control, you lower the intensity and get back under control.
Yep.
And so I think an interval training approach where you climb in that threshold zone of 7 to 8.5 for anywhere from at least 3 minutes, but up to maybe 7 or 8 minutes. Going much longer than that, again, to go much longer than that, you're probably at a too low of an intensity, right? So again, it's not a precision thing, but I think that subjective 7 to 8.5 out of 10 is what most climbers would want to target. And if you find you're thrashing, you're getting a strong or a heavy pump, you're getting out of breath, you're about to fall off, well, then you've gone way too deep. You got to pull back. Yeah. And so it takes a little bit of experience to kind of suss it out. We're lucky to have a tread wall at our house. So we actually have different size holds on the wall. And actually, to really format it, we made wooden holds of 3 different sizes. Plastic holds are great, but all plastic holds are different, and it's tough to really control your training. So by having small, medium, and large wood holds, we can adjust our training. We can climb on the medium wood holds, and if we're starting to get too far, we can go to the big wood holds and go back, and kind of go back and forth and just try to stay in that threshold zone for whatever have we decided to go 3 or 5 or 8 minutes, whatever it would be. And then you take a rest, and the rest should not be all that long. They should at most be a 1-to-1 work-rest ratio, and then you get back on. And so your total climbing time will end up being 30 or 40 minutes, but you're not doing 30 or 40 minutes straight. Again, if you're doing 30 or 40 minutes straight, you're at too low of an intensity level to really bring about the best adaptation. So I like to differentiate between the recovery climbing or the arc climbing, which is the longer, lower intensity. And that's good to do on just an easy day, a recovery day, versus a threshold workout, which ends up being a pretty hard workout. But again, you have to have self-control and not go too deep that it turns into an anaerobic lactic workout.
Right.
And and again, that's where, you may have the best plan written down on paper, but if you can't execute it and have the self-control to stay where you need to be.
Self-control's the limiting
And it's
factor
tough.
there. You need to be in control.
One term that I use in this book, and it's actually perfect. I've not heard someone else talk about it, but climbers have a pump lust.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
You go
That's
to the
a great
gym.
Word, yeah.
Yeah, you go to the gym. You want that pump.
Yeah.
And unless you've gotten that blistering pump, unless you walk out of the gym feeling like you can't, turn the keys in your ignition, you feel like you had a bad workout.
Yeah.
You have to get past
I'm
that.
totally going to use that.
Yeah.
I grew up that way. I had pump lust forever.
You got to get past the pump lust. So, now, if you're doing an anaerobic lactic workout, then go for it. Satisfy that lust.
Yeah.
But if you're doing a threshold workout, or if you're doing a strength power workout, be free of the lust, and know that you're leveraging science and not succumbing to the lust of the pump. And so a climber, they might do a perfect threshold workout, but then wreck it at the end
because they have to get pumped.
They have to get pumped,
Yeah.
And
I saw a post by Andrew Bisharat the other day that I thought said this pretty well. It just said training is about restraint.
Yeah.
And performance. I don't remember what he said it was about, but basically that's the part I want to highlight, is that you have to use restraint, especially when you're training these energy systems.
Yeah. And it's, climbers are going to the gym and doing what they intuitively think is the best thing. We fail on routes because we pump out. We fail on routes, long, hard, steep red point, and you're just, you fall going for the anchors on the force at the red, as I did several times a few years ago.
Yep.
You feel like, oh man, your body's wasted. You're sucking for air.
Yep.
And you think, I got to go to the gym and replicate that perfectly.
And there's value in that.
And there is value in that, but that can't be every workout.
Right. Especially if you need to learn the skill of climbing with a pump and learning how far you can go before you fail. That's where I prescribe that type of climbing for people. Go until failure, even though that's not the popular thing to do. I think if you don't learn it while you're training, you're going to learn a hard lesson while you're performing.
Right. And
it should be kept early on in your climbing, I think.
Yeah, and it's obviously important to train that anaerobic lactic energy system, the one that gives you that massive blistering pump. You need to train it. You can't ignore that. But a lot of climbers, that every workout ends up devolving into training that energy system. And here's the interesting thing. That's the least trainable of the three energy systems, is the anaerobic lactic energy system. The adaptations that result from that are very limited. So if you're training that all the time, you're missing the boat.
And training the other two will help it.
Training the other two will hugely help it.
Right.
By getting stronger, you'll be able to climb at a lower percentage of your maximum and dip less deeply into the lactic zone. And by having a stronger aerobic system, you can be powered aerobically longer. So again, it gets back to, you need to train all three energy systems, but most climbers, most of the time, and I've been there for years, devolve into training or, trying to satisfy that pump lust, because that's what they experience when they fail, and therefore they conclude every workout has to end that way. Every workout has to target that. And I'm telling you, listener, if that is you, you're not training as effectively as you can. And really, those adaptations that result from those blistering workouts, they accumulate and increase for only 2 to 4 weeks. That's what it's looking like. So if you're doing more than a 2 to 4 week block of anaerobic lactic training, after that 2 to 4 week period, you're kind of wasting your time. Mm-hmm. The most important time to do that 2 to 4
your
week,
skin.
and maybe your joints and your tendons and everything else. But the most important time to do that 2 to 4 week block of that pumpy anaerobic lactic training is right before your performance climbing.
Exactly.
So you want to train your aerobic energy system. You want to train your anaerobic alactic. That's your strength and the power. And then your last block, if you're going into competition or if you're heading on a road trip or if you're heading to a crag to go for your PR red point, your last 2 to 4 weeks of your cycle should be that anaerobic lactic energy system, because it does a couple of things for you. It gets the anaerobic enzymes up, it gets your buffering systems up and working, and that's what you want heading to performance day. The strength and the aerobic training have to be done way ahead of time, and then kind of that last period trains that anaerobic lactic energy system. Now, you can't train it up to the last day. You need to taper properly. And I have a section in the book about how to do a proper taper. You want to get to the crag fresh, obviously. One thing I always even tell my kids is you can't cram when it comes to training. You know, if you're heading to the crag on Saturday and Sunday, a blistering workout on Thursday is not a smart thing. Even if you're young and recover quickly, it's still not a smart thing.
Yeah, even if you're a weekend warrior and you get Tuesdays, Thursdays to train, that doesn't mean at the peak of your season you should be going hard on Thursday in preparation for the weekend.
Nope, you're not going to be 100%. And but yet it's gratifying because you think, man, I'm getting that last minute workout in that's really going to make the difference. And oftentimes that last minute workout, it makes the difference. It prevents you from sending your proj on the weekend. So, again, that's the art of program design. And that's where a really good coach can be helpful. I mean, many times throughout my book and every time I give a training talk or engage somebody electronically, I say find a good coach. If there's one in your area, or if you have access to a Chris Hampton or whoever, find a good coach. It's sometimes hard to tell a good from a bad coach, so that's a whole other topic. But the art of exercise program design, that is really huge, and having that that long-term game plan. It's not about what you did your last workout; it's what you did the last 10 weeks or the last 10 years if you're really on a long-term program.
No doubt. I think that's really important to say. And that's probably a good place for us to wrap it up. I know you've got family and dinner and Tony's Pizza to get to. And but man, congrats on the book again, and thank you for the years of mentorship. Definitely your books were huge for me early on, the How to Climb 512, and reading those books early when I started sport climbing and really getting into training were big for me.
Well, I appreciate that.
I appreciate you letting me into this circle that you're in. So.
Well, I one thing in recent years I've enjoyed more and more is really encouraging the next generation of climbers and the next generation of climbing coaches. I hear almost monthly from a college student who's studying exercise physiology. Maybe they're pursuing their master's and they're looking for research topics. They want to cut themselves a career in climbing or training for climbing. And I like encouraging those. I hear from people that want to write climbing books, and I actually encourage them. I mean, when you talked about starting your business, I encouraged you.
Definitely.
There's maybe some coaches or authors out there who think that only their stuff counts, but that's not me. I think the more information, the better. Of course, the consumer of that information has to do their due diligence and understand the resource or the source of that information and try to determine the quality of it, and also try to reconcile the often conflicting information that's out there, and that can be a challenge for the consumer. My book, hopefully, while again not the final word, hopefully can give a good, mature understanding of the science and of how to go about training, and with that, hopefully, become a healthy, strong climber for life, and.
If you get something from Eric's books, and send him a message, let him know. I know he loves to hear that stuff. And
the climber feedback's the best. I mean, every time we travel these summer trips, every crag I go to, and last summer in Europe, people recognize me or the family and come up, and the kudos and the appreciation and the smiles on the faces. I mean, that's why I do all this. That's why I got into training for climbing. It's probably why you got into training for, Todd Skinner and I used to joke that we enjoyed training almost as much as climbing. And I think, you're probably that way as well. I mean,
and I'm finding now that I like watching the people I coach succeed maybe more than I care about my own successes, you know?
For sure.
When someone sends something, I get so excited. And when I send something, it's like, okay, on to the next one.
Yeah, that joy, because we can all relate to like, clipping the anchors on your project. It's that's why we keep coming back. But training is fun. And I guess the closing thought I would have for people is smart training is even better. It's even more fun because that means you're training effectively. And, so hopefully people can take away the idea of that pump lust. There's workouts
I'm gonna use that for
There's
sure.
workouts to satisfy that, and there's workouts to avoid it and to shun that. And the other thing I guess readers should or listeners should do is ask themselves what junk training they can get rid of. There's stuff that we all do at the gym that provides no benefit whatsoever. It's like there's dogma that says you should do this or do that, or that extra final lap on your route or problem. Maybe the smarter thing is to not do it. And, then that's where climbing wisdom comes in. And so to train smarter means to not necessarily train harder. And I guess with that, we can wrap it up here.
Yeah. All right. We'll go get some pizza. I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Absolutely. Anytime, Chris.
All right. Oh, man, what a great talk. Absolutely filled with information. You're going to have to listen to that one a couple of times. I got a lot out of it listening to it the second and third times myself. So definitely go back and check that out. And definitely look for Eric's book online. I've got some links on the blog site. So you can definitely pick it up there through Amazon. The third edition of Training for Climbing. I really, really believe that it's Eric's best book. And I really appreciate that Eric is the go-between guy between these lab coats in the labs and the climbers who are out there actually doing it. Eric is a good person to talk to those guys because he retains that scientific information, which is really hard for me to do. And then he can translate it into real climber speak because he's actually out there on the rocks doing the thing. And I train and I coach by feel mostly and by anecdotal evidence and what works for each individual person. But I like to know the science so that I can apply it. And Eric makes it easy for me to understand, and he'll make it easy for you to understand as well. So definitely check that out. And don't forget, we've got the new app plans out that were former ebooks, and those are the Boulder Better, the Boulder Strong, and all the variations of the Climb 512 program. So check out powercompanyclimbing.com. Click on the Train With Us link, and you'll find those. Also, we've got the ebooks out there still. Those things are popular. If you haven't checked them out, you might just find one for you. And look for us on the social medias, the Facebook, the Instagram, the Pinterest, and the Twitter. Yeah, don't look for us there because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
It's time to build.